Good afternoon, all the nerds out there. I hope you all are doing fine. And guess what? We are almost done. We have completed everything about literary theory, criticism, and culture studies. And this is our last topic in these 4 units that we have discussed. So I hope it will excite you because definitely it's gonna be an interesting talk. So, guys, be there and let's start. So, today we are diving into this fascinating world of psychoanalytic feminism. So, here is the first slide for you guys, and here the introduction that you can see. All the points are there, and let's begin. So, this psychoanalytic feminism, it's a theory that's all about exploring the roots of oppression, particularly when it comes to men and women. So, psychoanalytic feminists argue that there is something deep in the human psyche that drives men to dominate women. And this theory points to Freud's idea that femininity is linked to something called the Oedipus complex, right? That we have already discussed in our previous session when we talked about psychoanalytic theory and criticism. So, guys, this particular thing, it also challenges the notion that our gender identity is set in stone from birth, suggesting that it's more of a delicate process. And I'll tell you why. And here's, the things really get interesting. Why? Because early second wave feminists that we have talked already, like Simone de Beauvoir, Kate Millett, and Germaine Greer, and also we talked about Freud and other feminists, right? And they believed his theory, Freud's theory, perpetuated sexual differences and made women seem inherently inferior. So, according to Freud, gender development happens during what he called the phallic stage, and which hits between ages 3 and 6. And that's when kids start to notice those differences between boys and girls. But here's the twist. Some scholars weren't buying Freud's take on women's sexuality, like Carl Abraham, Helen Deutsch, Ernest Jones, and Karen Horney. They questioned his ideas about castration and penis envy. Horney, in particularly, thought that female disposition was more of an inherent trait than something that developed because of castration fears. Horney was all about reclaiming female sexuality and blamed culture for women's subordination. And she was not here for Freud's idea about penis envy and inferiority. Now let's talk about Nancy Chodorov, who was another important figure in feminism. She tried to bridge the gap between psychoanalysis and feminism, which many thought were like oil and water. Another guy, Peter Gay, even called her work the most rewarding and responsible contribution, especially to the feminist debate on Freud. So Chodorov argued that Freud's view of masculinity and femininity mirrored patriarchal societies. Her critique of femininity was really a critique of patriarchy itself. And this opened the door for more critical thinking about psychoanalysis and gender. Again, lastly, there is something transcript of a lecture called Femininity, Narrative and Psychoanalysis. And that was given at a conference in Australia in 1972. So this lecture brought together English literature, politics, psychoanalysis, and feminism to explore some of these ideas even further. So, guys, there you have it. It's all about psychoanalytic feminism and, of course, its connection to Freud, gender development, and the fight against patriarchy. So, remember, these ideas have sparked a lot of debate and continue to shape discussions on gender and psychology today. Okay, so that was all about psychoanalytic. Let's move quickly to our titan in this particular field is Ernest Jones Phallocentrism, and that we'll talk about. But first, let's focus on Ernest Jones. So he's a Welsh neurologist and psychoanalyst, and his fascinating buddy Sigmund Freud, right? They became the ultimate, kind of best friend forever in 1908 and teamed up to explore the wild world of psychoanalysis. Now let's talk about something called phallocentrism, and which is quite important in psychoanalytic feminism. It's this idea that the male sexual organ, also known as the phallus, is like the star of the show in how society works. So this concept has been thrown around in various fields like literature, psychology, linguistics, and of course psychoanalysis. Ernest Jones was the guy who coined the term in 1927, and when he was chatting with Freud about how crucial the phallic stage of childhood development is. So according to Jones, some male analysts got a bit too fixated on the whole phallus things. But then again along came Jake Lacan in his article The Significance of the Phallus, and it was came around the late 1950s. And he again introduced some knowledge to us and said, hold up guys, the phallus isn't just a body part, it's a symbol that represents a whole bunch of stuff. And that's where again Jake Derrida enters the scene, and he basically said, hey Lacan, your ideas are still pretty obsessed with men and their manly thoughts. So Derrida thought that this whole phallocentrism thing was a bit one-sided. Right. So in a nutshell, you have got Jones and Freud talking about psychoanalysis, Lacan introducing the idea that phallus is more than just a body part, and Derrida said, like, guys, let's not get too hung up on this whole phallus thing. It's all about challenging traditional male-centered thinking. So guys, that was all about Ernest Jones and why he's important, because of this particular term, phallocentrism. And that question that you have already got before, and certainly this time you might encounter once again. Now let's move to another important figure in psychoanalytic feminism, is Hélène Cixous. And she's a kind of fascinating figure in feminist literature and theory. So picture her as this amazing professor, literary critic, and all-around powerhouse in the world of feminism. Now, one of her standout work is called The Laugh of Medusa. And this piece is a big deal because it challenges the idea that women are silenced by language and of course by society. She's basically saying, hey ladies, you have a choice. Stay stuck in a world where you can't fully express yourself because of language barrier. Or she's saying, use your own bodies and your words to break free. It's all about empowerment. So Cixous was heavily influenced by some big names like Derrida, Freud, Lacan, and Arthur Rimbaud. So these thinkers helped shape her ideas and gave her the intellectual foundation to make her mark in feminism. Now here's a term you should know about, écriture féminine, and that, most of the time you get questioned based on that. So what actually is this écriture féminine? So it's like her special writing style, a feminist genre, if you can name it. So Cixous wanted to shake up traditional male-dominated writing style and explore how language and culture shape our ideas about the female body. She argued that women needed their own way of writing to tell their stories and express their identities. And guess what? She didn't want to separate women based on gender or authorship. She believed that this particular term, écriture féminine, could bring women together to create strong narratives about themselves and their experiences. Now let's talk about another term that she had coined, logic of anti-love. This is Cixous' way of describing how society makes women doubt themselves. It's like women are taught to dislike who they are and what they have because it doesn't fit some traditional outdated idea of femininity. She wanted to break free from these, oppressive views. And then there is another term called white ink. So here she calls for a feminine mode of writing, which she compares to this white ink. It's all about using writing to assert your authority and express yourself fully. So she's all about women taking control of their bodies and of course their words. So in her passionate call to action, she encourages women to write for themselves and take ownership of their bodies. She says, writing is for you and you are for you. Your body is yours and please take it. So in a nutshell, Hélène Cixous is this trailblazing feminist thinker who challenged the status quo, encouraged women to find their own voices and create a whole new way of writing that's all about empowerment and self-expression. So guys, that was all about Cixous. Now let's move to another important feminist is Louise Iger, and of course her sexual differences. So she is a Belgium-born French thinker who made some waves in feminist and cultural theory. So let's break it down one by one. So first of all, you may ask, who is Louise Iger? Well, she's this cool lady who wore many hats. She's a feminist, psycholinguistic, and psychoanalyst and culture theorist. She was all about how language was used and sometimes abused when it came to women. And if we talk about radical feminism, Irigaray was like a pioneer in radical feminist thinking. She believed that women should be included in every aspect of life, no exclusion. She used her writing to talk about sexual differences and to fuel the postmodern feminist movement. And she had this pretty deep idea that Western culture was built on a big sacrifice of women. Note that, especially the mother figure. She thought that society kind of brushed women aside and that needed to change. Here's another thing, guys. Irigaray believed that sexual differences didn't really exist in the way we typically think. So, alright, let's talk about her books. Her big hit was Speculum of Other Women in 1974. In this one, she takes on some big names like, Freud, Hegel, and Kant. And she was looking at how they saw the world through a male-centric lens. Another is In This Sex, which is Not One, from 1977. She gets into Lacan's work and throws in some political economy too. She argued that society kind of treats women like they are just symbols of currency in a game played by men. And then there is another work, Elemental Passions, from 1982. And again, there was another work, The Forgetting of Air in Martin Heidegger, which was published in 1999. And if we talk about sexual differences, it is actually, basically she said that the whole idea of the subject or ego in philosophy and psychoanalysis is heavily influenced by some dudes, and women often got sidelined and were seen as the other or tied to nature. So there you have it, guys. Louise Iger in a nutshell. She was all about smashing stereotypes, shaking up philosophy, and making sure women had a rightful place in the spotlight. Another important figure, as you can see over your screen, Juliet Mitchell and her psychoanalysis and feminism that we'll talk about. So she's a badass British psychoanalyst and socialist feminist. She's done some pretty cool stuff in her career. So what are they? Let's talk about it. Now, one of her standout work is Psychoanalysis and Feminism, which was published in 1974. So, Peter Gay, a notable scholar, called it the most rewarding and responsible contribution to the feminist discussion about Freud. You see, Freud was often accused of being a bit of male chauvinist, and Mitchell tackled that head on. She looked at Freud's idea about masculinity and femininity and said, hold up, this reflects a patriarchal culture. Didn't you notice? So she believed that women's oppression boiled down to 4 key social structure. And can you guess what are these? First, production; second, reproduction; third, sexuality; and fourth is socialization. Now she didn't go at it alone. In 1982, she teamed up with Jacqueline Rose for feminine sexuality. This time she was influenced by Lacanian thought, which added some extra layers to her ideas. But here's the thing, some folks were saying Freud was a monster, and Kate Millett was one of them. But Mitchell came back with a response saying, no, we can't just toss Freud aside. She argued that Freud's work were actually critique of those, patriarchal institution we were talking about earlier. Now here's a fascinating point. Mitchell believed that gender isn't set in a stone, but more of a fantasy we create in childhood. She defended Freud's theory of castration, suggesting that it's not about a physical operation but a symbolic thing. It's like we create this story to make sense of the differences between male and female genitals. She also brought up the idea that in primitive societies, the exchange of women in marriage was a way to unite society, treating women like objects. Mitchell argued that women's identities were determined by how they were used in this exchange. So, in a nutshell, according to Mitchell, we have been telling ourselves a story that the sexes were once one, and that's why we feel a need to be whole. This makes the idea of femininity super intriguing, guys, because it's what keeps the fantasy going. So finally, she also talked about how modern capitalism has, split our world into public and private sphere, idealizing family like dominating by, males. So she was all about dissecting these power structure and getting us to think critically about them. Another important figure is Juliet Kristeva that we have already talked about in our previous session. But here, now the slide is here. I'll just be quick and brief, right? And if you want to explore more about her, you can just watch previous video. But anyway, Juliet Kristeva, who is a Bulgarian-born French powerhouse who has left her mark in various fields like psychoanalysis, literature, and of course, feminism. Now she's known for being a key figure in both structuralist and post-structuralist thought. So in this two topic that we have already discussed, these structuralist and post-structuralist, you can go and watch that video, and we have discussed thoroughly about Juliet Kristeva there. Right. So again, what is this, a structuralist and post-structuralist? No, it means she was into some deep thinking about language, society, and the mind. She wasn't just pulling this stuff out of thin air. She was influenced by some heavyweights like Roland Barthes and Claude Lévi-Strauss. Kristeva's work is like a melting pot of ideas. She took inspiration from folks like Lacan, Foucault, and Bakhtin. Her writings can be grouped into two main phases. The first, there's this structuralist semiotic phase, and then later on she gets all psychoanalytic, a feminist. And one of her big mission was to put the speaking body back into linguistics and philosophy. She believed that language wasn't just some abstract thing, it was deeply connected to our bodies and of course emotions. She wrote a book called Semiotic in 1969. It's a big deal because it talks about intertextuality, important term that most of the time you might face in exam. And that's a fancy word for the idea that no text stands alone. Every text is like a puzzle piece connected to other texts. So this, think of it as a web of meanings. Again, Kristeva also talks about something she called the semiotic and the symbolic. These are like two sides of the same coin. The semiotic is all about our basic instinctual and emotional expression, while the symbolic is the more structured, rule-based language we use. She introduced a concept called Khora, and it's this abstract space that's always changing and can't be pinned down. Plato used it, and so did Martin Heidegger, but Kristeva gave it her twist. And she said, it's all about things that are on the edge of being meaningful, but never quite get there. It's like trying to catch smoke that you can see it, but you can't hold it. Juliet Kristeva was a powerhouse of thought who made us rethink language, literature, and the very essence of meaning. She's like the ultimate connector of ideas, showing us that everything is interrelated and nothing stands alone in the world of thought. Now, another important figure, Sarah Kofman and Catherine Clément. And who are these ladies? Let me tell you. Both Kofman and Catherine was like brilliant French scholars. First, we'll move to Sarah Kofman. So she was this brilliant French philosopher. She started her academic journey with a bang, working on a super important thesis for her degree. And can you guess what? She ended up ditching her primary thesis, which she had been working on, and with none other than Guy's deluge. Can you believe it? This thesis later became a book called Nietzsche et la Métaphore. So she was all about Nietzsche and Freud, like they were, like in her jam. So she was all about Nietzsche and Freud. So speaking of Freud, Kofman wrote this awesome book in 1980 called L'énigme de la femme dans les textes de Freud. Okay, this is all French. So in this book, she basically dissected Freud's ideas about women and their sexuality. And now let's talk about Catherine Clément. She's not just a philosopher, she's a novelist, feminist, and literary critic too. Born in Bourgogne-Billancourt, she got some serious, credentials. She studied under big shots like Claude Lévi-Strauss and Jacques Lacan, both working on anthropology and psychoanalysis. So she's kind of important figure. We only have to remember these names, that's all, right? Now, another important stuff that I want to bring out here, as you can see over your screen, post-feminism. And it's quite important topic because, like a couple of years back, you have one question based on Susan Faludi. And as we know, she belonged to post-feminism. So now let's talk about post-feminism first. So this particular post-feminism is all about the reaction and responses to feminism, particularly where there are some issues, contradictions, or gaps in the feminist movement. Right. So first thing, post-feminism doesn't just critique feminism, but it can also take a closer look at the second wave and third wave feminism that we have already discussed in our previous sessions. So particularly, it questions things like black and white thinking, essentialism, which is like boiling things down to their core characteristics, and the connection between femininity and feminism. So why is this important, you ask, right? Well, understanding post-feminism helps us, to see how feminism, popular culture, and ideas about femininity have evolved and changed over time. It's like a window into the shifting dynamics between them. Now, here's a little bit confusion buster here. Post-feminism isn't exactly the same as the other feminist movement like Xenofeminism or fourth wave feminism. While they might share some, like common grounds, they have their own unique identities and goals. So post-feminism is a bit like saying, hey, we have achieved the main goals of feminism, so maybe we don't need to push it further. So that's the message. So it's like hitting a point where society thinks feminism has done its job and doesn't need to expand or evolve anymore. To see this in action, take a look at some popular media. Characters like Carrie Bradshaw from Sex and the City embody a post-feminist perspective. They might live a liberated lifestyle, but they're still caught up in the pursuit of love and approval from men. It's like they have embraced some feminist ideas but are still tangled in traditional gender roles. So post-feminism isn't just one thing. It can include various ideas that stem from the feminism of the 1970s. Some of these ideas might support classical feminism, while others might challenge it. So now if you're looking for some reading material to dive deeper into this particular topic, you can check out works like Who Stole Feminism? How Women Have Betrayed Women by Christina Hoff Sommers. Or of course, Backlash that we are going to discuss now, The Undeclared War Against American Women, which is by Susan Faludi. These books will give you a better understanding of the debates and discussions surrounding post-feminism. Now, Susan Faludi, I'm going to talk about here this American feminist journalist and of course author who's made quite a name for herself in the world of journalism. So Susan Faludi, born in 1959, has been known to dig deep into how women are portrayed by the news media. First off, in 1991, she snagged a Pulitzer Prize for explanatory journalism. What did she write about? You're asking, right? Well, it was a report on the leveraged boycott of Safeway stores. And anyway, that's not all. In 2016, Faludi got her hands on Kirkus Prize for her book In the Dark Room. It was so good, it even made it to the finalist round for the 2017 Pulitzer Prize in Biography. Now let's talk about one of her most famous work, Backlash, The Undeclared War Against American Women, which was published in 1991. So this book won her the 1991 National Book Critics Award, especially for non-fiction. And what's it all about? Well, it's all about how the media was pushing back against feminist progress in the 1970s. According to Faludi, they were playing the blame game, blaming the victim, if you will. So she argued that the women liberation movement got a bad rap for a lot of issues American women were facing in the late 80s. In her view, many of these problems were just made up by the media without much solid evidence, to back them up. So guys, that was all about post-feminism and of course about Susan Faludi Backlash. Now let's quickly move to our ninth slide, which is all about Angela McRobbie that we have already discussed before, and of course her third person reflexive gauge. So let me brief it here. She's this cool British thinker who's done some fascinating work in cultural studies, feminism, and of course media. So Angela McRobbie is like this intellectual powerhouse, and she's super into studying everyday stuff like movies, music, fashion, and all the things we love. But what makes her stand out is how she combines this with feminist theory. Like she's all about looking at popular culture through a feminist lens. One of the cool things she's known for is coining the term third person reflexive gauge. Now that sounds kind of fancy, right? But it's basically about how we look at ourselves and others in the media and how it shapes our identity. She's also heavily influenced by Stuart Hall and of course, the Birmingham School. These are like her intellectual buddies who have paved the way in cultural studies. We talked about Angela McRobbie in detail in this particular session, cultural studies, that you can go and watch. Anyway, now Angela's written a bunch of books and scholarly articles, and they are all covering a wide range of topics. She, talked about young women and how they are portrayed in popular culture, gender, and sexuality. And of course, the British fashion industry, which is a big deal, by the way. Social and cultural theory, the changing world of work, and this idea of the new creative economy. She's also tackled the rise of feminism and how it intersects with the thing called neoliberation, which is like a super important topic. Anyway, one of her notable works is The Aftermath of Feminism, which was published in 2008. In this book, she gets all, about Foucault. And she explores how different power structures and technologies of gender affect young women. And it's like she's dissecting how society shapes our identity and expectation. And again, she got another book called Be Creative, Making a Living in the New Culture Industry from 2016, where she dives into the challenges of working in creative fields like the arts and the media. It's all about how people try to make a living while being creative, which is something many of you might be interested, right? But anyway, that was all about Angela McRobbie, and one of the important figure is here over your screen, Donna J. Haraway. Most of the time, like for the past 6 to 7 years, they have been keep asking questions from this particular feminist, Donna J. Haraway. Remember the name? And of course, a Cyborg Manifesto, which was published in 1985. So everything about Donna J. Haraway is important from your exam point of view. So let's talk about who is this, Haraway. She's a brilliant mind in the field of science and technology studies. Right? Imagine sitting in one of her classes at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and she's a professor, of course, emerita in the Department of History of Consciousness and Feminist Studies. So this Donna Haraway is quite the character, guys. Back in the early 1990s, people used to call her a feminist and postmodernist. But she once cheekily referred to herself illegitimate daughter of Marx, and admitted to being something of an reconstructed and dodged Marxist. So guys, you have got to love her a bit. Look at the way how she replies. Something of an unreconstructed and dogged Marxist. Anyway, one of her most famous work that we are going to discuss here is a Cyborg Manifesto, which was published in 1985. In it, she talked about this idea of the cyborg. No, not the sci-fi kind of cyborg with metal limbs, but a concept that blurs the line, between humans, animals, and machines. Haraway challenges the idea of the rigid boundaries in our society, like the ones between human and machine or human and animal. So she's all about breaking down those barriers. So she starts her manifesto by mentioning three major boundaries breakdown. And can you guess what are these three? The first is the line between humans and animals is getting blurry. The second thing she talked about, 20th century machines have messed up with the lines between what's natural and what is artificial. And in the third, she talked about cyborgs. And by that, she actually means being that mix the physical and non-physical are, like politically invisible, and that's confusing. So Haraway uses the idea of cyborg to push for a new kind of socialist feminist politics. And she wants to ditch all those traditional categories that our society loves to put people in. For her, it's about moving beyond rigid gender roles, feminism, that labels and political boxes. One cool thing about her work is that she's all about the connection between humans and technology. She argues that we have always had this love-hate relationship with machines, right? And we need to embrace it. It's like we are part of this big interconnected system with technology. And of course, she is also a big into critiquing capitalism. And she talks about how men have historically taken advantage of women's reproductive labor, and that's held women back in the workforce. And it's not just the cyborg stuff. Haraway is also known for her work in ecofeminism, which is all about questioning our human-centered view of the world. She thinks capitalism is to blame for a lot of, world's problem, and she even coined the term, capitaloken or capital low scene. Anything, by the way. Now, next important thing that I want to talk about is ecofeminism, cyberfeminism, and of course, xenofeminism. So we'll start with ecofeminism, guys. Well, is this fascinating blend of feminism and environmentalism, where we look at how humans relate to nature through the lens of gender. Now, the term ecofeminism was first coined by a French author named Francois de Iabonne in 1974. And she wanted to explore how the way we treat nature and women might be connected. Ecofeminists are all about creating a fair and cooperative society. It's all about balance and equality. Now, there are different flavors of ecofeminism, like liberal ecofeminism, spiritual, cultural ecofeminism, social, socialist ecofeminism, or materialist ecofeminism. Each of them has its own take on things. We don't just stick to the one area either, right? Ecofeminism looks at how women and nature are connected in culture, the economy, the religion, politics, literature, and even art. It's pretty comprehensive. One key idea in ecofeminism is that it draws parallel between how we oppress nature and how we oppress women. It's a reminder that we should respect both women and nature. Now, there is a great work called Ecofeminism Toward Global Justice and Planetary Health by Greta Gard and Lori Groen. They talk about this ecofeminist framework based on the work of scholars like Rosemary Reuter and Carolyn Merchant. It has four main aspects. The first, like the idea that science, especially during the scientific revolution, treated everything as just resources, like dead, lifeless stuff. Second is how patriarchal religions establish gender hierarchy and sometimes dismiss the idea of divine presence in nature. Third, the dualism of self and other, which can lead to power imbalance and dominance. Capitalism, fourth one, which often exploits and harms animal, the earth, and people in the pursuit of wealth. And of course, some key figures in this materialist ecofeminism movement are Maria Mais, Veronica Benhold Thompson in Germany, Vandana Shiva in India, Ariel Sella in Australia, Mary Meller in UK, and Anna Ishla in Peru. Now let's travel back to 1973 in India. There was this amazing Chipko movement that you guys must have heard about it in Uttarakhand, where women came together to stop deforestation. They used non-violent protests to keep loggers from cutting down trees. It's a powerful example of how ecofeminism can lead to real world action. Now let's talk about cyberfeminism. So cyberfeminism is like high-tech sibling, and it's all about exploring how the internet and technology connect with feminism. Imagine it as a group of feminists in the early 90s who decided to put on their thinking caps and get all philosophical about the internet and new tech. Now the important figure of cyber feminism is Donna Haraway, right? And of course her Cyborg Manifesto is all kind of like the holy grail of this movement. It's all about merging humans and machines and blurring the lines between gender. Another is Xenofeminism, which is like the rebel offspring of cyberfeminism. It wants to use technology to kick gender's butt and leave it, in the dust. Think of it as an intersectional movement that's all about smashing the idea that gender is set in stone. And they're all for gender abolition. Let's get rid of that binary gender system once and for all. So, guys, in a nutshell, cyberfeminism, xenofeminism are like the dynamic duo of the feminist world, using the power of technology to shake things up and challenge old ideas and make room for everyone, including our queer and transgender paths. It's all about taking the master's tools and using them to build a better world where gender is just a small part of the story. Right? So guys, that was all about ecofeminism, cyberfeminism and xenofeminism. Now we'll just quickly move to another important topic, which is exploring queer studies and queer theory. And some of the important figure here, as you can see over your screen, Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, Michael Warner, Lauren Barland, Judith Butler, we have already discussed, Adrienne Rich, David Halperin. Queer studies or queer theory is all about understanding and celebrating diversity in sexual orientation and gender identity. So queer studies, sometimes called sexual diversity studies or LGBT study, is all about shining a light on the experiences of lesbians, gays, bisexual, transgender folks and everyone under the queer umbrella. We're talking about their cultures, their struggles and all the cool things related to who they are. Now the term queer theory actually started popping up in the early 90s. It's like the analytic brainchild of queer studies and women studies. This theory is a bit of a rebel. It challenges the idea that sexual identity is set in stone and says, hey, it's all society constructed. Our buddy Michel Foucault played a big role in shaping queer theory. He saw sexuality as something society makes up, and he wasn't a fan of people boxing themselves into identity politics. The term queer theory got its big break thanks to Gloria Anzaldúa, who was inspired by Foucault's ideas. Another is Teresa de Loretz, also deserves a kind of shout out for organizing the first queer theory conference in 1990s, making it a legit in the academic world. Now let's tip our hat to some of the important early stars of queer theory like Eve Kosofsky, Michelle Warner, Lauren Berland, Judith Butler, that you might remember her from our earlier session, right? Adrienne Rich, David Halperin, they're all like the pioneer of this whole field, paving the way for the cool discussion we are having today. But anyway, now let's move to one of the important queer theorist, Eve Kosofsky Sedgwick, and of course her epistemology of the closet. So she's an academic powerhouse in, of course, gender studies, queer studies and critical theory. She was like the superhero of LGBTQ plus academic scene. Now Sedgwick was all about breaking boundaries and pushing the envelope in her field. She played a massive role in shaping queer studies with her writings, and she was heavily influenced by the legendary Michel Foucault. And one of her cool moves was analyzing the hidden homoerotic stuff in classical authors like Charles Dickens and Henry James. Think of it as reading between the lines, discovering those subtle hints of same-sex attraction. But Sedgwick didn't just stop at analyzing. She was a word magician, coining terms like homosocial, anti-homophobic, to help us talk about her relationships and attitude in a fresh way. Now let's get to her greatest hits. Her notable works are Between Men, English Literature, and Male Homosocial Desire, where she really, started shaking things up. Epistemology of the Closet, which was published in 1990s. This one is a kind of game changer, and of course we'll talk about it in detail here. Again, another is Tendency, which was published in 1993. Okay, now let's talk about Epistemology of the Closet. This book was sparked by another essay, and it's like Sedgwick's ultimate quest to understand what makes us, tick in terms of sexuality. She's not a fan of simplistic ideas, especially when it comes to sexuality. She believes that, boiling it down to just homosexuality or heterosexuality is way too basic. Instead, she encourages us to break free from these standard binary oppositions. In the book, she, takes us on a journey through literature, pulling out ideas from heavyweights like Michel Foucault, Herman Melville, Friedrich Nietzsche, Oscar Wilde, and of course Marcel Proust. And these authors help her explore the concept of sexual identity and desire. Now there are two main views. The minoritizing view says that some folks are born gay and only those with deviant characteristics are into them. It's like saying being a gay is super specific. On the other hand, the universalizing view is all about embracing homosexuality as something important for everyone, no matter their sexual orientation. According to this view, there's no fixed erotic identity, and people can have different characteristics when it comes to their attractions. Sedgwick even goes a step further, suggesting that we all have a little bit of bisexuality in us, lurking in our minds and characters. So this is our last slide, guys, and here we are going to talk about other queer theorists, starting with Mildred Jessie Berryman, and then we'll move on to Adrienne Rich and of course other queer theorists. So this Mildred Jessie Berryman or MJ Berryman. So we're going to talk about this incredible guy who was quite the trailblazer in early 20th century Utah. Mildred, or Berry as her friends probably called her, was a multi-talented person. She did a bit of everything, from photography to selling minerals, and even co-owned a manufacturing business with her long-time girlfriend. But that's not all. At just 15 years old, she bravely came out as a lesbian while attending Westminster College. She even had this ambitious ideas of doing an academic study on lesbianism. But here's the twist. The college didn't quite agree with her thesis proposal. In fact, it caused quite a scandal. Some parents were so upset that they pulled their daughters out of the school. But Berry wasn't kicked out. She stuck around. However, all that drama took a toll on her, and she wanted to escape the shame surrounding her sexuality. So she, ran away at 16 and got herself into a short-lived marriage with a man. Talk about trying to fit into societal norms, right? Now fast forward to 1928, and Berryman finally got down to business. She started working on her groundbreaking thesis, The Psychological Phenomena of the Homosexual. She interviewed 23 lesbians and 9 gay, when she met through the Salt Lake City Bohemian Club. What's impressive is that she was a lesbian herself, conducting research on her own community. Her thesis was a game changer. She argued that being homosexual was something you were born with, completely harmless, and even present in many animal species. That was a big deal back then, and of course, still today. So that was all about this fascinating person, Berryman. Now we'll talk about Adrienne Rich. So Adrienne Rich, as we know, is an American poet, essayist, and of course a real trailblazer in the world of feminism. She was born in 1929 and left her mark until her passing in 2012. Now picture this, Adrienne Rich was like the rock star of poetry. And in the later half of the 20th century, her work was like a bullhorn for women's rights and LGBTQ plus community. Long before it was fashionable to do so. One of her big deals was bringing to the light the oppression faced by women and lesbians. She made sure these issues were front and center in her poetry. And she didn't just stick to one narrow view of feminism. She talked about something called the lesbian continuum, emphasizing the solidarity and creativity among women. Her first poetry collection, A Change of World, was so good that even W.H. Auden, handpicked it for the Yale Series of Younger Poets Award. Auden even wrote, the intro for it. And imagine getting your debut poetry collection, endorsed by a legend. Anyway, Rich was like a feminist champion, both in her words and action. She didn't just write poems and novels, she penned non-fiction books that tackled feminist issues, and she was all about smashing the patriarchy and made no bones about it in her writing. She kind of set an example for women to stand up against sexism. And let's not forget the feminist vibe in her poems. Take Power, for instance. It's all about Marie Curie, one of the most influential women of the 20th century. Rich unpacked power and feminism through Curie's stories. She touches on how Curie's groundbreaking research, which was her source of power, ultimately, took a toll on her health. Another gem is Rich collection, Snapshot of a Daughter-in-Law. Here she digs into the gender dynamic between mothers and daughters-in-law. It's like a deep dive into the complexities of these relationships. Then there is diving into the Wreck, which was written early in the 70s. This collection marks a shift in her tone as she tackles feminism and social injustice heads on. It's like she's taking us on an underwater adventure into the depth of these issues. One of her most powerful work is A Woman Born, where she delves, into the experience of motherhood as both an individual and an institution. It's like a crash course in the complexity of being a mother. And last but not least, Blood, Bread and Poetry. In this collection, she's got a famous essay titled Compulsory Heterosexuality and Lesbian Existence. It's all about feminism and community, something she was deeply passionate about. Other important queer theorists are like Michael David Warner, who authored The Trouble with Normal Sex, Politics and the Ethics of Queer Life, and he supported same-sex marriage. Another is David M. Halperin, who's a kind of founder of GLQ, Journal of Lesbian and Gay Studies, and her notable works are Before Pastoral and 100 Years of Homosexuality. So guys, that was all about our psychoanalytic feminism and queer theory. And that's all, guys. We have finally finished whole literary theory, criticism, culture studies. Isn't that amazing that all your 3 units are done now? And the good thing is all these units will have like over 200 to 100 tests that you can go and attend. And if you do that, and if you even watch all these videos that I have posted based on theory, criticism, and of course culture studies, you won't believe, guys, you will get 30 plus questions in your exam if you watch all these videos. So guys, thank you so much, and have a great day ahead, and I'll see you with a different topic tomorrow. So bye bye and have a good day.